Sometimes you read a story and it just makes you smile. And today is no exception. Thank you to the wonderful people at GB News for sharing this one. Southampton University have done a study on milk floats and their brakes. And they have come up with the following statement. Brake pad emissions on EVs are worse for the environment than diesel cars' exhausts. Oh, I mean, it just makes your heart glow, doesn't it? To know that these things exist. You've got to trust the science, remember, because I know all milk floats trust the science. They love it, a bit of science. I personally don't trust scientists at all. But in this case, it makes for some very interesting reading. They've carried out a study on milk floats and their brake pads and come to the conclusion that due to the extra weight that milk floats carry, and they use a different type of brake pad, in some cases ceramic brake pads, and in some cases some that involve a large amount of copper, it causes severe health risks from the emissions from the brake dust particles, which, according to their study and their conclusion, cause a greater deal of pollution and a greater harm to people's lungs, heart, etc., than a diesel car pumping fumes out the exhaust. I mean, what are the chances? Oh dear, to quote, and I quote, hang on, here we go with the glasses again, I quote, "It is more harmful to human lungs than exhaust fumes from a diesel. Non-exhaust pollution sources, non-exhaust," this is the other interesting thing, "now account for the majority of emissions across the UK and parts of Europe." So we've spent 30 years trying to reduce emissions out of the exhaust, because if we don't, we're all going to die and drown and various other stuff. And it turns out we're missing a trick here. Doesn't happen at all. The emissions are coming off your brake pads, and it's worse than the diesel cars. So this thing about we've all got to drive milk floats because we've got to save the planet, and milk floats involve more precious metals and child labour and the drying of the lithium and then the enrichment of the lithium, which goes from Chile over to China, then from China to Canada, and then the building of the batteries and the carbon footprint and the amount of plastic used and the amount, etc, etc, etc. Well, who'd have thought it? Milk floats are worse for the environment than your 30-year-old diesel. Not me saying this, not me. Scientists. Got to trust science. And the scientists are saying this at Southampton University. They're doing God's work down there. That's what So I went on to the comments. I very rarely read comments on news articles, but I read the comments. It's brilliant. Milk floaters are losing their minds over this. This study is wrong. It's all wrong. And do you know what? They all say the same thing. And there's comment after comment after comment, all saying the same thing. We EV drivers don't use our brakes. We've got regenerative braking. Brakes in an EV are only used in an emergency. I mean, do you honestly believe the stuff that you write? Can you honestly? What? So you go out in your milk float and you drive around town and not at any point do you touch your brakes. Never touch your brakes. That's only for an emergency. If a child runs in front of the car, that's the only time you're going to touch your brakes, is it? Is it bollocks? You are just protesting about the fact that that thing that you bought to make you holier than thou and make you better than your neighbours turns out to be more polluting than their 30-year-old Peugeot diesel they've got sat in the driveway, and now you can't cope with it. Only in emergencies. What, so you pull up to a T-junction? Just let the car stop by itself. It'll stop where you want it to stop. You don't need to use the brakes for that. You know, you're coming up to a bend, you just take your foot off the throttle. And yes, I do know, remember, I've driven over 50 different types of EV. You've probably only driven the one yourself. And yes, it is true, when you take your foot off the brake, the car will stop. When I used to deliver Teslas to people, it's the first thing I used to tell them. I used to say, you've got two things to worry about when you get in this car. One, when you put your foot down, it's going to go a lot quicker than you ever thought it would. Two, when you take your foot off, it's not going to coast. It's going to stop. And it's true. But to say that you only use braking in an emergency is utter bollocks. So you do use your brakes. And I'll tell you what, milk floaters, go on. Get yourself a bracket. Get yourself a video. Get a video of your foot. And drive for 20 miles and tell me how many times you put your foot on the brake. And if it's none, I'll issue a personal apology. And I will issue that apology on the YouTube channel for everyone to see. 20-mile journey, don't use your brakes once. If you can do that, I'll admit I was wrong. Good luck with that. It ain't ever going to happen. Not in a million years. Emergencies. Emergencies, my arse! You're driving something that's worse for the environment than the petrol and diesel equivalents that have been driving around for 50 years, and you just can't admit it. It's okay to admit you're wrong. I've just done it. I've just said if I'm wrong, I'm happy to admit it. I know I'm not wrong, so I'm fine. Emergencies. So there you are. Another nail in the wonderful EV coffin. Even the brakes pollute more than a diesel. And that's before you factor in the lithium batteries, the cobalt and all the other precious metals that the earth is being raped for on a daily basis by largely child labour. Oh, not to mention all the components that are made in China powered by coal-powered fire stations. But don't worry about that either. You keep saving the planet. Future my arse.